Families are very important to the Finnish people, and the Finnish tradition has been for large families. Our daughter has 9. The other daughter only has 4, so she's kind of, but we only had 3. And there's a lot of much larger families in the Cokato area that are traditionally Finnish.
And when my son went to school here in Das Cokato, one of his friends, not a close friend, but one of the friends he knew, was one of 18 kids. And he'd come home and say, "Dad, did you know so-and-so was one of 18 kids in the family?"
I grew up with 6 brothers and 1 sister.
You'll see a lot of their families up into the over 20 kids is not uncommon.
The Aho family kind of made the news a year or 2 ago when Seth was the last Aho boy going through the football program, and they'd had for 2 decades straight someone in the high school football program.
I have like 64, maybe up to 70 now, first cousins. And I love living in a small town.
My great-grandfather came from Finland in 1866. He was a lumberjack in Finland. He was working on a farm as a farmhand, and he did the classic marrying the farmer's daughter. They had several children, but in the 1860s, times were very hard in Finland. He was not part of the family, so he could not get land. And so there was land available in America due to the Homestead Act of 1862. So they ended up in Minneapolis. And at that time, he said, this is way too big a city. And so they walked out the 50 miles from Minneapolis to here, spent the winter in a small cabin just east of here, and then the following summer they built the house that you're in right now. Barbergs then have lived here since 1866, so we still have the original deed to the property signed by Ulysses S. Grant, and it's never left the farm, so I'm 4th generation living here.
Hello, hello.
I came to look for that book that I lost, and they had put it way on top of the shelf.
Susie is our editor and secretary.
People say that you're Finnish by osmosis. Actually, I'm German and Swedish. I had a boyfriend in school who was Finnish. And that relationship just kept on going on and on. And then eventually we got married. And his mother is probably the most influential person in causing me to be interested in Finnish history, because she was really concerned that the Finnish history and these buildings that we have as a society should be preserved. The traditions, the culture, all of that should be preserved. It kind of encourages people to go back to Grandma and Grandpa and ask them how things were in their days. And I think it's really, really important for young people to have a sense of a root or heritage, you know, that they can look back on. So I guess that's why I do this.
I don't always like the gossip that goes around and small talk, because everybody kind of gets into people's business. I think that people think that we're judgmental.
In general, people tend to be very honest. The Finns pride themselves in being honest. Finns tend to be a little bit aloof.
They stick to their own type as far as friends go, and hanging around with their own religious people.
So when I took the job here, that was kind of one of the first things that, you know, a few people talked about.
So the Finns like to stick together, they like to help each other, and especially at harvest season they would have working bees. They would use each other's equipment and come and harvest the field, and when that was done they'd go to the neighbors and each help one another.
The name Cokato comes from the Dakota word in the middle of, because this was the big woods, and that was the reason why the Finnish liked this area. They loved woods. Finns were very well known for clearing woods. They were woodsmen. They used the log for heat and then also for building purposes. Where trees grew, there was good black soil if they were able to clean the stumps, and they were very good at that. Of course, the other thing that Finns are known for is the sauna. And this was originally a savo sauna, which means savo means smoke in Finnish. Your behavior in a sauna is like behaving in church. There's no hanky-panky or nothing going on. The savo saunas did not have a dressing room. So they would undress outside, go in the sauna, have their sauna, go out, cool off, and then go back in again. Well, no problem with any of the Finns, but the non-Finns said, hey, this is a disgrace, you gotta move your sauna. Well, this was the first lawsuit in Cokato Township. By this time, my grandfather sold his share to the guy across the road, and the township said, you gotta move your sauna. And so he took him to court, and he won. They had to pay him damages plus the cost of moving the sauna. So he moved it across the road, and that's when my great-grandfather built this one in 1880. So this one then replaced that one at Temperance Corner. The non-Finns had not heard of saunas, and they couldn't figure out, what the Finns were really doing, if this was a pagan religion or what it might have been. Most Finnish are Lutheran from the Lutheran tradition, and Lestadius was a revivalist Lutheran in the mid-1880s in Finland and Sweden. And so my great-grandfather, he studied under him. And so when they eventually came to Cokato, then he was nominated to be the lay minister.
I've got at least one friend over the years that is a Lestadian Finnish individual. He has let me know quite a bit about their church and their beliefs, and maybe kind of comparable to a Mennonite religion, very strict. Don't believe in rock and roll music or dancing or organized sports. Only if it's with the church can they be in sports. So,
in my master's thesis, I was studying the history of the Finnish Lutheran Church in the Cokato area. And in 1972 and 1973, there was a break, or a heresy as we call it in the church. And in the majority, we call it the majority, they stayed with the church, and we were in the minority, so we had to establish an entire new church in Cokato. So we relocated to Stockholm, which is south of the city, in the area which was traditionally called the Swedish area. And then those that were in the majority stayed in the red brick church, which is right next to the cemetery. We were in the minority, and we didn't participate in high school sports, or didn't have televisions in the home, and didn't go to the high school proms. And those that stayed with the church, they are still even active today in high school sports. If you read in the Minneapolis Star and Tribune in the sports section and look under the statistics for the Litchfield Cokato Dassel hockey team, you can see many of the names are Finnish names, and they are members of they call themselves the
First Apostolic Lutheran Church. We're all friends, and it's like our own bubble and our own little clique. We don't have rules. I mean, they say you shouldn't do things, as long as you believe, and it's all in your heart and how you feel what's right in your heart.
I think, there's definitely a close knit about the community, that the families that go to the same churches are very supportive of each other, and probably, more interactive with within their group than they are, with the community as a whole, I think.
If you come here and you're not Finnish and you see that this group of people is kind of doing their own thing, you obviously say that they're different because they're kind of an outlier.
They just seemed a little mysterious, I suppose. Growing up, I had grew up next to many Finnish houses, Finnish families that had plenty of kids, but I was never allowed over to their houses, and they were never allowed over to mine. So we could play in the streets, but we couldn't cross that border. It took me a long time to figure out what that was all about, because obviously when I moved here, it was right away. You know, those are the Finns. You know, and it was just always there.
It's normal around here, and everyone knows that it's normal, so live with it.
As a whole, is going to just continue to evolve in quiet, subtle ways as the next generation of kids grows up and the next generation of kids grow up. And it just depends if those kids want to hold tight to the traditions that they were taught, or if they will slowly let loose of some of those traditions.
One of my good friends, Brian Lockinen, is Finn, as you would say. I met Brian in first grade at a church in Dassel, and our parents were friends, and then I ended up going over to his house one day, and we were best friends ever since. We started playing music early middle school, probably about 5th grade. My dad bought me a bass. Brian got a guitar. I don't believe he ever attended the Finnish churches.
Yeah, like the old one. I remember going to that. I remember a bird got in there once and started flying around. Everyone got all riled up. We started going to a different church when I was like in first grade, I think.
I am 75% Finnish, and I have lived here all my life. My brother originally played bass guitar in high school. That's where I got my inspiration to start guitar, you know, because he played bass. Now I want to do something different.
When the Finns came, they were like any other immigrant group that came to this area, whether it was the Germans, the Swedes. They all spoke their own language, they all had their own traditions, they all gathered in their own places of worship. And slowly, mostly through school and kids, they start to blend together.